in my right eye. And I thought, what is that, a floater? It was very unusual. And I closed my left eye, and I could see that there was a oblong slit in my right eye, very neat slit. And there were words racing through it at breakneck speed, like somebody was typing. They were in Courier. They really looked like typewriter typing, racing through my eye. And I thought, my God, what is this? And after I concentrated on it, I could read it, and I realized it was related to the book I was writing. It was a historical novel. It had nothing to do with any of this stuff. And it was like a sort of super thesaurus. In other words, a thesaurus might give you words that are related to a word, but this was giving me words that were related to the ideas I was working on. It was amazing and great, because it was like having an incredible muse in my head. And I couldn't read them consciously, but it was obviously going into my mind somehow. And, you know, the novel went very well. And then while I was working on it, I discovered another thing about it. I started asking the implant all kinds of questions, of course, because I figured it's alive in there, and it is, you know, here are these questions. And I've got a lot of questions. And it answered some of them from time to time in a very unusual way. I would ask a question, and sometime a day or so later, like the novel is set in World War II, and it's a faux memoir of a young man who ended up, a young German-American who ended up close to Hitler and became an Allied spy after he realized what Hitler really was. And so it has to have a lot of verisimilitude. It has to be really as if you were, the man who was writing it was there. And so I needed to know all kinds of things about Hitler. Like, one example is, what was Hitler's toothpaste? What toothpaste did he use? Because he was obsessive about his body, and he brushed his teeth 4 times a day. So that was a factor, and had to be a factor in the book. And I had no way I couldn't find anything. And I thought, I'm just going to have to choose a toothpaste that was being used in Germany in the 30s, but I really wanted the right one. You know, you get like that when you're writing a novel like that. Damned if I wasn't going on Google, and I suddenly noticed that instead of the English Google, I was in the German Google. And I don't even speak German. I had no idea there was even a German Google, to be frank with you. So there was something about Hitler there. I could see his name, and I clicked on it, and it was a book that I bought. And it was by one of his valets. I used the translator that you can translate, and I translated all of that on the web and bought the book, and it came about 2 weeks later. And at that point, I just happened to run into a woman who spoke fluent German, and she translated it for me, and there in the book was everything I needed to know about Hitler's private toiletries and everything. And I didn't attribute that to the implant at first, but other things have happened since that make me think it is exactly what it is involved in this.
So that's how they communicate with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think think if we knew how this all was working, and people not, you know, basically a novelist, but a highly skilled scientists could make use of something like that, how fast would we make progress then? It's really tantalizing, and I'm sort of hoping that my book, most people, they hear me, they think I'm completely crazy, and they just blow it all off immediately. Or, you know, they think of it in terms of UFOs, and that's not, I don't think, necessarily all that accurate a way of looking at it. But think if this worked, if there was a smooth level of communication between us and whatever is on the other side of things like that. And I'm hoping my book will chip away at the iceberg a little bit, and maybe some people will see it and think, well, maybe actually I could try this, because it's not hard to do, and you can see in the book how I got into regular communication with them. So that's sort of my hope. It's much of a hope. I don't think it'll work because, as I say, most people just laugh at me.
Well, you know what? Terry Lovelace has been on my show several times talking about his ordeal being abducted, his implant. By the way, he told me to say hi to you. He is listening tonight. Now, he claims he has an implant in his knee. And, Terry, maybe what Whitley is saying, you might give it some thought. Maybe they've been trying to communicate with you all these years, and you just haven't realized it, just like Whitley didn't realize it.
Well, if he needs to have an MRI on it, because we did find one or two when we were researching them at Southwest that disappeared as soon as they were touched by X-rays. I mean, that became X-ray invisible. So if it's X-rayed and they don't see anything, he needs to figure out how to get someone to give him an MRI scan of that leg and see if it's in there. Because I've had numerous MRIs and it's never affected it, but it has been visible under an MRI.
Interesting. And again, what's the size of yours?
It's very small. I don't know. Centimeter. I mean, maybe 2 centimeters at most.
Interesting. So, where you plan to? Are you been asking it more questions since then, and have you been getting more answers?
I certainly have. I've asked it when I started to write the book about this. I was constantly working with it, and it was extremely useful. To give you an example, I asked it to tell me something that I knew nothing whatsoever about, that I had never heard of at all, that would be useful for the book. And it came up with the fine structure constant, which is it turns out is the greatest mystery in physics. And for a lot of reasons, it was very useful knowledge for the book, and it plays a big role in the book because of the fact that the mystery of it is, why is it what it is? It's 1/137th. It's the distance between the spectrographic lines in a spectrogram of hydrogen. Only most constants we understand why they're there. In other words, we understand the principles of nature that make that constant inevitable. But this constant is completely arbitrary. There's no apparent reason for it to be 1/137th. And the man who discovered it was named Wolfgang Pauli. He was a very, very great and famous physicist who lived in the 30s. His heyday was in the 30s, and he died in 1950, I think, 6, as I recall. And he was so mystified by it that he struck up a friendship with the psychiatrist Carl Jung, who worked on a lot of myth and things, ideas of God and things like that, because he was trying to find something in myth that would explain the reason that this was there. Because it's almost, as he puts it in one of his letters to Jung, he says it's as if God just decided that this was a nice number and did it to do it. There's no reason for it. And of course, this physicist does not actually believe in God. He was really curious about it, and he died not knowing, and we still really don't know. But we do know that it is one of the stablest constants that we measure. He died, ironically enough, in a hospital in Switzerland in room 137, which is so odd because Jung was the great expert on synchronicity and the meaning of synchronicities in the world. And it's a huge synchronicity that Paulie would check into the hospital and end up in room 137 when this was the greatest mystery of his life. And he died there. And I'm telling you about things that are at the edge of reality, but they're still there. And the visitors are there too. People always say, well, why don't they just sit down across the table from me and tell me about how to build a cool cell phone from another planet? It ain't like that. This isn't about stuff like that at all. This is about something greater and bigger and more extraordinary, something bigger than our ordinary lives. It is really about a new world and a new way of living.
Interesting. And how many years did it really take you before you realized all this? I mean, what, about almost 30 years?
I've been living with this since 1985. Yeah, 30 years. And I'm still living with it every day of my life. It is the center of my life experience. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. And it has been really hard. It's been really hard on every level. They're hard. They're not easy to deal with at all. They're very scary and they're very difficult. Very difficult. And the public reaction is awful. I'm so scorned, and I can't even, when I'm with my family, I can't let their neighbors know who I am. When neighbors come over, I have to go upstairs, because if they saw that I was the rectal probe man, the UFO, Mr. UFO, it would ruin my family's life. So, it's hell. I live in hell, but it's the most interesting damn hell you can possibly imagine.
It sounds like it, because I mean, a friend of mine who's no longer with us, Art Bell. Yeah, he was a good friend of mine too. We wrote a book together. Oh, I know, and Art thought so much of you too. I know an Art.
Same here. We were like brothers.
Yeah, I really miss him. I was actually in retirement, and when he started Midnight in the Desert, and after he got out of it, he called me up out of the blue moon, and because I would go up and see him every summer on my Harley up here. I live near Seattle, and me and my sons would go up there, and I would spend a half a day with him, and we'd talk and all that stuff. He'd show me his ham radio gear and his antennas. But, here I was retired, and then one day I get a phone call, and he goes, well, are you going to come up and see me? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, well, you know what? Sell it. You need to get back on radio. And here I am. I started out at an internet radio, and now I'm on 22 radio stations. I tell you, at my age, it's kind of hard, but, without Art, I wouldn't be doing something I enjoy.
Yeah, I took over Art's show Dreamland back in 1998. And the show Art and Ramona, the Saturday night show that was on their evening shoulder on Premiere, and I did it on Premiere for a while, and then they ditched it because it wasn't making any money or not enough money, and Art retired, and it was all very hard. But I still do it. I still have it I've been doing it for over 20 years now. And it's on my website, unknowncountry.com. I do it every week. And that is big part of my life, Dreamland.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do listen to it occasionally, too. I tell you,
a lot of people listen to it. It's very popular. But I don't have to worry about radio stations. No radio station's going to take a nut like me. So I don't have to worry about that.
Well, I'll be honest with you, you're lucky. When I started out, I didn't have no radio stations. I was just doing it on the internet. And then all of a sudden, one station wanted, and you know what? Now I have an agent. And like I was telling my friend, James Cushbaum, who's my co-host, he's real quiet, and he's actually listening on the air with us. But you know what?
I hear you.
I was telling him today, the pressure, when you get an agent, all of a sudden now they just want you to perform. I'm going on 68 years old. I'm still young, but I'm spending 13, 14 hours a day doing this show. But anyway, we need to go on break. It'll be the last break. We got you for another half an hour. I want to ask you more questions. This is about you and this great book. I got it here in the mail yesterday. I got fourth way into it, and I'll tell you what.